Hello, everybody. Dr. Lonnie Stewart here from the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. Are you a physical therapy student about to start studying for the National Physical Therapy Examination? Or maybe you're a professor, a program director, or clinical instructor who teaches DPT students preparing for the NPTE? Either way, we would recommend checking out our sponsor, NPTE Final Frontier, and the community they've built around preparing for and succeeding on the NPTE. That exam and the preparation that goes along with it can be long, tedious, difficult, and stress inducing, but it doesn't have to be. NPTE Final Frontier has the tactics and resources to help address all of the usual barriers. They even have scholarships to help with NPTE study courses, FSBPT registration fees, and even research opportunities. And if that's not enough, they're even donating to the very first annual HET Podcast Scholarship to be awarded at the end of every year. Go to npteff.com for all of the details and use code HET for 10% off all purchases. Links to both the NPTE Final Frontier and their scholarship options are available in the show notes. And now, let's get ready to learn.
Welcome to a Teach Me Something Tuesday. I'm Farley Schweighart, one of your HET podcast co-hosts. And today I really want to talk about teaching with boundaries and teaching with expectations. We're all human, but we operate better with expectations. We operate better with boundaries. We're seeking out those boundaries, and that's what our students are seeking. And so this is just a reminder to set expectations for your class. For me in lecture, when I'm lecturing, I do this actually for lecture and lab. I go into every class and on the whiteboard, I write numbers of what all we're going to do that day. So I'll go up and I'll put number 1, welcome. Number 2, questions. Or, I'm the DCE here. And so if we need to talk about clinical education questions or whatever. Number 3, quiz. Number 4, PowerPoint on shoulder pathologies, whatever the expectations are for the day. So then that helps the student come in and get organized and know this is what's going to happen next. This is what's going to happen next. Honestly, I feel like that is a more sound way to teach than them having to guess and be willy-nilly. It's the same thing in lab. I write down what we're going to do in lab that day on the whiteboard, and then we just go through. And I always repeat when I'm in lab the same system. I will demonstrate manual muscle test. They will practice it. They will switch partners. Then we'll go to the next. And then we'll come back and do repetitions. And I will call out and they will practice and switch. Just setting expectations. When I have them in my student clinic, I help them self-assess their expectation. What do I need to work on in my practice right now? Okay, I need to work on being able to have better manual cues when I'm working with this patient or whatever it is that day. I try to really help the student start doing self-assessments of expectations of what they want to work on. It's the same thing we use in sports. It's the same thing we use in lots of other places in our life, but they need that. Physical therapy, as you well know, is a great profession, right? Because we're dealing with the human body. But to get to that gray, we have to start with the black and white expectations, showing them where you've got to know where the lines are so then you can figure out how to color outside the lines. I've seen faculty members just say, oh, go work on this. And I know that frustrated me as a student. I needed some leadership. I needed some expertise. I needed some framework to go work on that. You don't know what you don't know as a student. So setting those expectations, whether they are written down or verbally, and repeating those expectations, and then holding students accountable to those expectations. That's how they help learn. We're working on building solid foundations for these students to become therapists. You have to have a solid foundation before you can become great, before you can go do all the fun, gray, really nerdy things in physical therapy. You've got to get through those expectations and know them. It's just as simple as that. So I hope this helps you think about how are you setting expectations for your students, whether it's outlining the day in the class or repeating the same formula in lab so that they're not having to deal with matter of surprise They're just having to work through the material. Same thing with your PowerPoints. Are they set up in the same fashion? Some people will say, well, that's boring. And it can be, but I think consistency across every class you teach helps the student gain confidence as well. They know what to expect from you. They know what to expect on their rubric. They get their rubrics 3 days in advance of their practical. They know what those expectations are. And then they're held accountable to those expectations. You can't hold students accountable to expectations that they don't know. Well, you should have already learned this. For me, too, even though I expect they learned some things in different classes, I don't really hold them accountable to those expectations until I have taught it to them and worked through it with them. For instance, every time I start my student hippotherapy clinic in the fall, we go over the gait belt. Now, these students are second year students. They've been in the clinic once by the time they get there. They've had a whole class on these things, but I have found that I have to hold them to an expectation of the gait belt that they've not been taught sometimes, or they just didn't process because maybe they were in an outpatient clinical. They didn't have to use a gait belt. They haven't processed that information as well or really honed in on that psychomotor skill. So I reteach the gait belt and my expectations, and then I can hold them accountable to that further. So let's set boundaries, let's set expectations, because that is what helps build foundations for our students for the future.
Well, I hope that episode was entertaining as much as it was informational and educational. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our past episodes, we ask you to please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. And please share out the episodes to those who you feel may be able to benefit from them. We also urge you to follow us on all social media platforms at HET Podcast and let us know what topics or experts you would like to hear from in future episodes. And just as a reminder, none of the information on today's show should be considered medical advice. It's simply infotainment or edutainment to help educate our audience. For medical advice, we always advise you to reach out to your preferred medical professionals, and we'll see you on the next show.